there are two particularly good reasons why the Church might speak on specific social and political issues. First, because local churches are witnesses on the ground in every local community, and they can choose to talk publicly about their experiences for the sake of the quality of our life together. Second, because questions of peace, order, love, and justice are questions which theology and politics genuinely share. They are, differently expressed, the responsibility of both and the sole preserve of neither. This shared responsibility matters hugely when we observe that there is no natural relationship between liberal democracy, modern capitalism, and social justice. Neither of those things automatically produces social justice for us. Short-termism, pollster-led politics, the power of money, and short networks remain powerful forces in frustrating the capacity to build a renewed social, political, and economic culture which focuses on human dignity. The two issues which arise under both of these two headings, the grassroots experience of the Church and the wider responsibility to foster discussion about the quality of our common life together, are firstly, for me this evening, welfare and work, and secondly, migration. I'm going to say a few words very briefly about each of these. Immigration is a hot political topic. For the last decade in our politics, it has continued to poll in the top 3 political issues that voters say they care about most. The pollsters are clear. Politicians must show that they are willing to deal with labour market pressures, to reduce pressure on public services in areas affected by intense rapid migration. They need to deal with a perceived lack of cultural integration in places, and so the pollsters argue they must show that they can deter future migrants from seeking a life in the UK. In response, the political discussion has been reframed by the main parties, perhaps as follows. The fair or moral purpose of immigration policy is to ensure that only migration which is in the British national interest, i.e. economic interest, should be allowed or encouraged. We need clear policies that offer a preferential option for British workers and which bring in only the most highly qualified from the global market. This will then reduce pressure at the lower end of the jobs market, pressure on public services, and will produce migrants more likely to integrate and assimilate. In addition, we should take a very limited number of refugees, but nothing we do for current refugees should offer any kind of encouragement to others to think about coming here. In this kind of conversation, national self-interest and the common good is taken to mean public policy should generally deter migration to the UK, especially amongst unskilled and low-skilled economic workers and asylum seekers. Views on how that deterrent should take place vary widely. In their general election letters, the Church of England bishops, the Catholic bishops of England and Wales, and the joint public issues team representing Baptist, Methodist and URC churches all called for a different quality of common good conversation for addressing migration questions. They are clear. Having a conversation about migration is not racist. Talking about pressures which result from a failure to manage migration impact at a local level, or the ways the global market gobbles up migrant labour and spits out those who cannot afford to compete with mobile labour, matters. So it's not what's in the conversation so much as the very framework for having it that troubles the Church. They have challenged the idea that a Christian conversation about immigration begins or ends only with a category of national interest defined in market terms. Our national interest relates to a wider set of Christian categories, so the Church argues, which concern duties to honour the dignity of each person, regardless of citizenship, to offer hospitality to strangers, and to recognise our universal kinship through Christ, beyond national borders. When Pope Francis talks about what he calls the globalization of indifference, he suggests that what we see in Europe is a disorientation of the so-called settled. It is often not the migrant on the move, but the settled who have lost their bearings, failing to perceive a need to weep with those who weep, to see the stranger as neither hero nor victim, but a person with a name. And thus the churches remain unsettled by our half attempt to talk about only a very select range of immigration issues. 3 additional common good issues have been picked out by a coalition of church and refugee sector groups to talk about with parliamentary candidates in this election cycle. Firstly, the continued use of indefinite detention. We remain the only Western European country without a limit on how long we can detain a migrant for administrative immigration purposes. We currently detain 30,000 immigrants a year, and tonight we will detain 3,900 in detention facilities. Second, our failure to receive and protect Syrian refugees in the UK. Third, the disproportionate financial barrier represented to family unity by new spousal visa rules. These migration common good questions matter too, and largely these migration matters affect those who are without political franchise and those who cannot lobby in their own favour, and so the churches have specifically chosen to address these 3 issues. The second practical area where the churches have been consistently vocal in recent months, based on their own local experience of running food banks, concerns matters of welfare and work. In recent reports on food bank usage, half to 2/3 of those using food banks across the UK do so because of failures in the benefit system. Most experience the precariousness of low pay, uncertain work, and many face the challenge of living with a variety of physical and mental health challenges, or alternatively, being willing to care for others who do. Food bank use is not, so these reports suggest, the result of long-term strategies to avoid work or supply and demand logic, but of short-term, unmanageable crises for those who were already walking the tightrope of barely manageable lives in the first place. The failure of our society to meet basic needs in these cases is rooted in the failure of systems of welfare bureaucracy, a failure to value the role of carers, high-interest debt repayments, and the volatility of the low-wage job market. To talk about food banks is to talk about the condition of work. It's to talk about political economy. It's also to talk about the way that an often highly bureaucratized and now often sanctions-orientated system does or does not deliver a genuine measure of welfare. We can't talk about welfare without talking political economy, nor talk about welfare without talking about what has happened to our relationships of care and trust amongst each other in our communities. Migration and welfare, both are questions about love and work. And to be clear, these are not, as Sam rightly suggested at the start, questions only of law and professional politics. To suggest that they are would not really produce a conversation about the common good. In fact, one of the tendencies that we should be most wary of in common good terms is the tendency to want to promise to fix things. These are deeper questions of how we restore to ourselves the dignity of our own political nature, how we form ourselves collectively as a body politic. Out of the most unsettling and difficult years of the 20th century came common good movements which brought momentous change in housing, welfare, education and health policy, in which organised people with a purpose drove questions of dignity and did not leave those questions to elected politicians alone. But those movements are now gone or in decline, and it seems almost certain that serious renewal of our politics will require new forms of public friendship to be built amongst us, rooted in the living traditions that give us some imagination and a dose of courage to look at how things really are and to imagine creatively and positively how they might be transformed.